just like who you are.
Have a conversation today with Dr. Oona Paredes at on the department and future of Southeast Asia Studies. We're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. I want to thank the Association of Native Alumni at the University of Pennsylvania for providing this land acknowledgement. We recognize and acknowledge that the University of Pennsylvania stands on the indigenous territory known as the Lenapehoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenape, also called Lenni Lenape or Delaware Indians. These are the people who, during the 1680s, negotiated with William Penn to facilitate the founding of the colony of Pennsylvania. Their descendants today include the Delaware tribe and the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape, the Ramapo Lenape, and the Powhatan Lenape of New Jersey, and the Munsee Delaware of Ontario. And now I'll hand it over to Wani to introduce our speaker.
Great, thanks everyone, and thanks Becca for starting the event. So I'll just be introducing like the working group, and Andrew will be proceeding to actually introduce the speaker in a certain session. So it's nice to see familiar faces here. Thank you so much for being here with us. So Southeast Asia Working Group is a new collective of multidisciplinary, critically engaged scholars who are building on the generative intellectual traditions central to Southeast Asian studies. It treats these traditions as avenues that will allow for the decolonizing of methodologies and the development of new solidarities, which expand the boundaries of conventional area studies. Currently, the steering committee consists of myself, Rebecca Winkler, Praveen Vijayakumar, and Assistant Professor Andrew Caritas as our faculty advisor. So the group aims to increase the representation of scholarship on the region by especially highlighting the work of Southeast Asian scholars. SEAG, in short, will be organizing more sessions later this semester, as well as reading groups and spaces to discuss works in progress. So just to give some heads up, we will be having some of these upcoming talks in the next 2 months, and we hope to see you there. So to keep updated about our upcoming events, please follow us on our Instagram at SEAG_UPenn, which we'll put in the chat box. And if you are interested in joining the working group or to be updated in our mailing list, please email us at our email, which we will also put in the chat box. So now let's delve into the session for today on the conversation and future and development of Southeast Asian studies. And I'll pass the time to Andrew to introduce our speaker and to take the conversation away.
Okay, thank you for coming, everybody. And special thank you to Oona Paredes, who I'm very, very happy was able to make it here today. I just want to say a quick word as to her biography, which will come to figure in various ways in the conversation today. Oona Paredes is an anthropologist and Southeast Asianist and faculty member in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of California, Los Angeles. She specializes in the ethnographic and archival study of the Southern Philippines, in particular its indigenous non-Muslim minorities known collectively as the Lumad. To date, she has worked primarily with the Gaunan Lumad of Northern Mindanao, but also studies the experiences of comparable indigenous minority groups regionally and globally. And at UCLA, she teaches classes on Southeast Asia, indigenous peoples, and the Philippines. And before joining UCLA in 2019, Oona was at the National University of Singapore, where she was an assistant professor in the Department of Southeast Asian Studies and also served as the faculty convener for the Religious Studies minor program, and as the Philippines Country Study Group coordinator for ARI, the Asia Research Institute. And as I recall, there were a number of teaching awards won along the way that I should highlight. She was also previously a strong professor at the University of Toronto Department of History, a fellow of the American Association of University Women, and a graduate research fellow of the US National Science Foundation. And so as a group, we cobbled together 4 questions that we'll present in sequence, which relate to approaches to Southeast Asian studies across institutions, current developments or trajectories in Southeast Asian studies, approaches to indigeneity in Southeast Asian studies, which is an enduring focus of across your work and your recent 2019 article in the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, And finally, the future of Southeast Asian studies as you see it. So I'd like to just jump into the first question here. Could you talk a little bit about your positioning and how your work biography has shaped your understanding of Southeast Asian studies across institutions over the years? So how has Southeast Asian studies been taught or practiced in, for example, the National University of Singapore and UCLA, but also in the Philippines? Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, for that kind introduction. And I'd really like to thank the organizers for inviting me to do this. It's a real pleasure to get to know you, and I hope to hear more about your work in the future. Okay, well, just I want you to know that they did send me these questions in advance, but I did not prepare answers. So if it sounds a little kind of disjointed, it's because it is. There's nothing actually prepared. Yeah, about positioning and biography. Now, you know a little bit about my work history, that I was working at NUS, and then now I'm working at UCLA. I've been here since 2019. But before that, there's a lot of other sort of back and forth history between the US and Southeast Asia in my personal history. I was born and raised in the Philippines. And even within that sort of a very simple phrase, born and raised in the Philippines, there was also a lot of mobility internal to the country between the countryside and the metropole in Manila. So I think from the very beginning, I've just been sort of a very maybe I've just been pretty much a very mixed person in terms of my biography. After I moved to the States, I went to graduate school here at Arizona State. And so my whole intellectual history and my whole formation as an anthropologist has been informed by US theory, the U.S. educational system. This is the way that we do universities in the States. Ideas about intellectual development and what a proper academic career looks like. That's all been informed by my very distinctly American experience, such that when I started to work at NUS, there were some adjustment issues because I was being too American about a lot of things. So that's something that if you're thinking about going back and forth, that's something that you'll need to be aware of in your own, in your own self. And I thought that when moving to Singapore, that me being a Southeast Asian, going back to Southeast Asia to work in a Southeast Asian studies department would be very unproblematic, but it was actually the opposite. So, and so I came into that department, being a sort of a very mixed background kind of person on many levels. And then it's been really interesting because after I came back to the US and started working at UCLA, it really felt like a homecoming. And I realized that's because sort of intellectually, my home is really the United States. And so my colleagues in my department here, pretty much all of us have the same kind of uh, not necessarily this, we don't think the same way, obviously. It's just that we all kind of are coming from the same, I think, intellectual context, more or less. And so it's we speak each other's language a little bit more fluently than what was going on in Singapore for me. Having said that, it was really interesting to be someone who was, for a change, not a part of a minority in this, grand educational institution, and that was quite an interesting experience in many ways. I was in many ways part of the in group. But yeah, so in terms of my biography and my positioning, that's where that's peculiar position I found myself in Singapore. There are huge differences between working in a place like Singapore and working in a place like Los Angeles. I think that I'm keeping it. I'm saying Los Angeles because I'm not sure what it would be like to work in other parts of the U.S. I guess I've pretty much been very much a West Coast, Southwest person as far as the U.S. is concerned. Yeah, there are anxieties that you have to deal with when you're working in a place like Singapore that you don't have to worry about when you're working in a place like LA. And that mainly has to do with the anxieties of the institutional anxieties that people outside the West have about measuring up to Western trends and Western standards. You have the whole NUS as an institution really thinks of itself as kind of a maybe Harvard of the East or something akin to that, and has always been very concerned about its international status and international standing. But how is that status measured? How is that established? It's according to trends that they see in the West. So that's been very interesting for me to observe because I mean, there's many critical things I can say about that particular practice, but I guess maybe the easiest way I can put it is that how in any university, when you're a faculty member, there's always concerns about, in an academic system, how many articles you publish, what your rankings are, your citation index, and all of that stuff. That I think the anxieties about those metrics are doubled in a place like NUS, because it's pretty much akin to what Ben Anderson calls a specter of comparison. So it's not just about government and other similar bodies in a place like Southeast Asia comparing in the colonial peripheries comparing themselves to the colonial metropoles. It also, for me at least, applies to academic institutions outside of the West. So those were the kinds of that was like a really peculiar, a very interesting pressure that I had to deal with, and everybody at NUS has to deal with, and actually anyone in any academic institution in Singapore had to deal with. But then coming here to the US, I found a tremendous flexibility in terms of metrics and how your academic productivity is measured. And I found that there's a lot more leeway given and actually a lot more interest in all the other things that were completely disregarded in Singapore, which had to do with local engagement, with local scholarship and stuff like that. What I mean by that is that here in my department, in Asian languages and cultures, our engagement as scholars with local scholarship in Asia is valued. And our publications in local academic publications in Asia is actually valued, and it counts towards our tenure and promotion and stuff like that. But in Singapore, that didn't count. They had a definite hierarchy of where you should be published and what matters, what conferences to participate in, and the local sort of academic field was practically erased. So this is kind of a very interesting contrast for me. Yeah, but there's also a lot of other contrasts I can make, and one thing has to do with how Southeast Asian studies is taught and practiced in Singapore as opposed to over here. In Singapore, Southeast Asian studies, it was, I don't know, I guess self-evident that it was an important thing to care about, whereas here in the States, it's something